Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I'm Ella, Jeff's assistant. It's so nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. Gosh, this evening's subject is all about karma and our astrology. So exciting to hear Jeff go into this. But first, he's going to talk about current events. Quite a bit's gone on since we had our last show. Of course, we all know that Kevin McCarthy was just signed in as the 55th Speaker of the House of Representatives. So interesting because he is about to have his 58th birthday. Jeff, I made a mistake earlier when you and I were talking. I thought he was about to turn 57. He's about to turn 58 on January 26th. And you did look at his birth chart. So
I did.
Let's get started.
Yeah, thanks, Ella. One thing's for sure, we can say that it was a absolute fiasco electing this Speaker of the House. They say it's been over 100 years since the 1800s since something like this insane has happened. And of course, we saw on TV a literal fiasco. Over and over again, he was rejected. They even wanted to nominate a Democratic person if they couldn't for the speaker or congressman, if they couldn't get an agreement between the Republicans. And it almost happened. So here's the interesting thing. I'd like to put up this chart because it really demonstrates Mercury retrograde. So we can see here, this is the inauguration time for Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. And we can see here, first off, Mercury is retrograde. You can see this little RX next to the Mercury retrograde. And what's so important here is that I've always said the occidental phase of Mercury retrograde is always a problem. You can actually see I'm circling it here in red so you can see it. The little RX right there means it's retrograde. And of course, Mercury will rise after the sun, which is the occidental phase. And it's exactly indicative of what happened. It was just fiasco and chaos. And it hasn't happened for over 100 years. Also, when he took the gavel, when he was actually sworn in, it was Scorpio on the eastern horizon with the south node in the ascendant. And what rules Scorpio? Well, Mars. And notice Mars was also retrograde. So again, a lot of confusion and delusion here, but he agreed to all the terms and conditions. And of course, as we know, he is now the speaker. So what does this chart mean? Well, I would tell you that it shows delays in things, even though the Congress now has acted quite quickly in getting, or I should say the House has operated quite quickly in repealing the IRS, 87,000 agents, which is real good. Also, they are now even speaking about abolishing the IRS entirety and putting a flat tax in on goods. Now, that's been talked about for a long time. I've been hearing about this for 50 something years. Let's hope it happens. It's actually a really good idea. Many people feel that the IRS tax, income tax, is a unconstitutional thing that's been put on the people. We'll see if that happens. And I also might mention, in the Vedic astrology, in Sidereal, there was a lunar mansion called Purnavarsu, and it's really a strong nakshatra or a lunar mansion for the moon. And it actually means quivers and arrows, like shooting, and it's an aggressive moon. So this shows delay because by traditional astrology, it has a void of course moon, but in the Vedic astrology, it shows it's strong. It's just going to have a little bit of a delayed action before it happens. It also shows some rather aggressive things on opposition. And of course, we would expect that. The Democrats and the Republicans are always going at it. I personally don't believe in either party. I think it's just the bought and paid for ones and then the ones who aren't. But long story short, it does look like it will move forward with some good energy. One other point that I'd like to show, and I'm going to put up this chart. This is Kevin McCarthy's birth chart on the inner wheel here where I'm circling, and the outer wheel is his current transits. Well, here's a little something I like to point out. Many people I've often said, geez, Saturn returns and Saturn's always bad. Well, if you notice something here, notice transiting Saturn is in Kevin McCarthy's 10th house. Well, in astrology, we know the 10th house is what? Career. It's the way you comport out to the world what you do in life. So he has his Saturn returning to his Saturn in his 10th house of career. And it's a pretty substantial position. So I just wanted to point that out. A lot of times people always say, oh, Saturn's always bad. Well, sometimes Saturn, I have seen when Saturn returns happen and powerful Saturn in the chart aspects are happening, you actually can see great rises. Saturn rules your karma. And remember, that's the topic of this video. I can tell you, karma comes in all sizes, shapes, and forms. Comes in small packages and big packages. So we're going to find here that I think this was a substantial thing. I mean, think about it. If the president and the vice president go south, the Speaker of the House is actually the next one in line. So it's a very powerful position. And this is demonstrated by the Saturn returning actually 3 times this year. Kevin McCarthy will has his Saturn return to his Saturn position. So that's interesting stuff. So that's what's going on. We'll see what happens here with all of that. Secondly, we heard huge information about Biden. Of course, the Biden documents were found by their attorneys in a closet, in a locked closet, back when Biden was vice president. And essentially, it was at the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagements. So again, this fits with all the astrology we've been talking about for ever since we started this podcast. And that is, we are under an attack, I think, as a democracy, unlike I've ever seen before. And this is also the Pluto return on the United States of America. So we have some powerful, powerful times right now in front of us. And as we mentioned on previous podcasts, we've got these really powerful primary solar arc directions also happening on the United States over the next 2 years. So this is going to be an interesting time, to say the least.
Absolutely. And it's really going to be interesting to see what is going to happen with Biden, because the astrology shows he might not make it all the way through his presidency, right? So let's see.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded us of that, because that's right. When I mentioned the Biden-Harris inauguration chart, an inauguration charts means the time at which they were sworn in Washington. When I looked at that chart, I think he's going to have a really tough time getting through his final presidency this year, particularly. It's not looking too good. And, it's very, very dicey times right now. Another thing I wanted to mention was the weather. My God, if we had weather or what? The rain here in California.
Torrential rainstorm. It's been pretty wild. Yeah.
I mean, you sent me an Instagram post earlier today of this guy skiing down the road down towards the ocean. I think it was Venice Boulevard, where the LA River was coming in. And oh my God, I mean, the roads and the canyons are just mudsliding. I've never seen this much rain in 35, 40 years out here. I've never seen this much.
Yeah, definitely.
Torrential.
Incredible energy. It's all energy, right?
Yep. Well, I think part of this is there were some X-class solar flares. And see, this has been being talked about a lot. The grand solar minimum, people are right. This is actually, it's going to get colder. And the weather patterns are really, superstorms are likely to be even more. We're seeing the cycles of the sun, particularly with some of these solar flares, are getting enormous. There's supposed to be some more coming out right now too. So I really believe this has a huge effect on the weather. And we're seeing some erratic weather patterns. I don't really, my personal feeling is it isn't the global warming, it's the sun. It's clearly, a lot of scientists feel the same way, but they're not able to get a voice on that. But I can tell you, I've never seen weather like this out here. I mean, just strange, erratic patterns and wind gusts and currents, and not fun.
Yeah.
So,
pretty wild. Well, talking about weather and all of this, the weather, Biden, McCarthy, then you can jump right to karma because we all have karma to experience, right? It seems like every single thing, every interaction is karma playing itself out. And some people say, well, your karma is your karma. Those are the cards you were dealt in this life. Go into it, Jeff. Go into karma.
Well, yeah, that's a really big topic. I get asked about karma a lot. And, us Westerners, when we hear the word karma, we think, oh, it's got to be bad, right? Lightning bolts and, some angel, slaying us with the sickles is always the feelings of karma. But it's really interesting. I've had a real blessing of working with a lot of different religious organizations. And it's very fun to not be locked into anyone's dogma or anyone's, indoctrinations, where I can stand back and kind of interact with them without having to, buy into it to be aware of it. And all of us can do that. We can study a lot of different documents. And I mentioned just a short few of them on a previous podcast I just put up, which was more for clients, but I was actually surprised a lot of people really read it. And we missed you on that, Ella. But anyhow, the bottom line is karma is such a deep topic. And I think it is probably the most important topic when we look at Jyotisha, or you could say Nadi and Vedic, quote unquote, astrology, because the Egyptians knew a lot about this too. And I also might add the rabbis have some of the most lucid treatments I've ever seen on karma. And I want to talk about that later on. But I think we'll start first with the whole concept of karma. There is a belief, and I have wonderful conversations almost daily with many different people in self-help fields, transpersonal help, psychiatry, psychology, and I really enjoy that because we're all here to help each other, and we all are here to learn and grow. And I don't want to bash the religions, but some of them need bashing, because this is one area I really believe has not been expanded upon appropriately by many different religious doctrines. And I think they were there originally. I really do. And I don't care which religion you talk about. They all talk about tithing and helping people, or your actions and reactions, all these cause and effect things, right? And they also talk about your soul, right? Like you'll hear about people getting a mark on their soul. Remember, mom and dad would tell you stuff like that. Well, this is all the elements of karma. In fact, what's most interesting in astrology, if you look at the glyph of Saturn, what is it? It's the cross over the crescent of the moon. So Saturn is the planet that has always been assigned to hold the karmic etheric energy that releases during this lifetime. In fact, in Naadi Astrology, they actually state specifically that we were incarnated into these bodies to dissipate and rectify the karma of not only ourselves, but of all of our interconnected soul root connections, which is pretty deep stuff, way beyond anything anyone's fully ever going to figure out, and me included, I can tell you that. It's the more you learn, the more you realize how intricate it is. And they actually say, and this is interesting because it's covered in the Western biblical documents, particularly the Old Testament, and it's also talked a lot about in the New Testament as well, and quite accurately. What's interesting is that they say us souls incarnate down into these physical realms. And, I've mentioned in previous podcasts about some of the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, on and on. And it's very interesting when you go into these secret societies, they actually had quite a bit of challenges with the churches because they felt that much closer to the Vedantic documents, that there were many realms that humans would incarnate into. And many of the secret societies and the Egyptians knew this stuff, the Chaldeans, the rabbis, and there's documents to prove it. So what's interesting about all of that is they said that there is literally multi-dimensional universes. Have we heard that one before? Portals. We've heard about the government taking, certain places over and looking at time portals that were purported to be. Some people think there's stuff going on with the pyramids in that sense, in certain chambers. Also, there are rumors that in Iraq, in Baghdad, there was a portal that they confiscated when we went in there in 2003. And there's many places that are believed to have transdimensional portals. In fact, Skinwalker Ranch is clearly known. There was a TV series about that. And I can tell you my personal experiences, this stuff exists. It really does. So we're certainly in a reality here, but I would say when you look at the soul's journey, karma becomes a part of that. And what's so important is I love the way the ancient Nadi and Jyotisha, meaning Vedic astrology, breaks it down. They actually say there's 4 general types of karmas. And these are pronounced different ways, so it depends on which dialect you get around, because a lot of this stuff comes out of the ancient Sanskrit, Tamil, Dravidian, and Hindi languages. Very, very, very ancient stuff. And also the Egyptians, I might add, knew a great deal about this as well. But just to keep this simple, because we don't want to get too deep here, and I'll refer to some documents later that you can check out about that. But the categories, there's one called Sanchita, which is like a collection. It's like if you took a bushel basket and said everything you ever did and heaped it on the table, that's it. So that's kind of like the heaping of karmas, if you will. The second one is a strange word called parabda. Now, some people do pronounce that slightly different, but this is the karma that's like the plane on the runway, ready to take off. This is the stuff that comes to fruition during this incarnation. And then there's the Kiryamna karma, which is the karmas that you currently have that you may be creating with free will. And then there's Agama karmas. That's approaching. So this is a little confusing. Trust me, you'll never figure it all out. But it's cool to visit this stuff because these are the general classifications of karmas. So when people get astrology readings, that's one of the first things I'm always looking at. Okay, you can see the karma of the mother, the karma of the father, the karma of you, the karma of potential siblings and spouses. And this is where Vedic astrology is sufficiently different than your sun sign astrology. It's so much deeper because they look at planets as signifactors. In fact, the ancient astrology, a lot of it, the Nadi particularly, they don't even care what the eastern horizon is. So I find it's very, very helpful to know that. But not to get too deep here, as I'm going to keep this kind of fun and topical for this podcast. And then this might excite you to researching these areas a little more and also to realize how powerful these energies are. So anyways, long story short, these 4 classifications of karma are sitting in your birth chart. And, I had a wonderful conversation earlier today with a client, and I really enjoyed this. And she posed a wonderful question. And Ella, you've asked things like this too. It's like, do we have free will? And are we our sun sign or our astrology? And the answer is clearly no. My opinion, at least, and the opinion of many ancient texts are, we were not born to be our astrology, but our astrology might be us. Now, that's kind of pretty deep when you stop and think about that. What that means is that when mom's water breaks, that baby's got to come out, right? And I've heard of babies being born on the floor, in the hallway, in a taxi cab, on an airplane, or, just playing in the bed, right? My grandmother was born, in a bed on a farm. And many people were born like that. Mom just, that's it, baby coming out, let's get it out. So they say the angel waits and ties the body permanently to the body or the physical body at first breath. Now, that's an ancient legend that's really quite interesting because when you look at that, there's a lot of terms in the ancient Vedantic documents called prakti and kalapurusha and purusha. These are all references to the physical body and time. Time. What about time? We're all looking in the mirror every year and we see that time keep rolling, right? Every year you got to pay those taxes. So time is a very interesting thing. And they say time starts, or the dissipation of karma starts, when the soul is believed to originally drop in to this dimension, or you could say sector of the universe that Earth and the solar system is in, at least for us. And this is really deep stuff. But the legends are told in the Mahabharata. They're told in the Bhagavad Gita. They're also told in Exodus, and Exodus is one element, but it's also cryptically told in the Western Torah or Bible. So it's really interesting stuff. And I think what's so unique about India is it is a country that has maintained a real kind of cohesive set of texts that had not been destroyed as much by wars. It certainly has had disruptions, particularly when the English went in during Gandhi's time and other times, but it's more cohesive than many other places. Egypt has them too, but a lot has been lost with the wars and the ravages of time. And the same thing with the Greek stuff. So, but a lot of wars here in the West. Every year is marked and earmarked by wars. But anyways, where I wanted to go with this is that they say that's when the karma starts. Wasn't this interesting? This is the same story we hear that is in the Zohar and also the ancient Bible. This is the Adam and Eve story, but much more expanded in some of the Eastern documents. They haven't been neutered down. See, remember, I always said the original Aramaic and Hebrew is the gold, because there's cryptology in this stuff. There's actually coded ciphers that these scriptures pass through, and there's immense secrets in them. And I don't think anybody drawing breath fully understands them. And what's interesting is the Tamil, the Sanskrit, has the same thing. There's actually codes, numerological codes, deeply embedded in this stuff. And phonetic sounds have a lot to do with it too, in numerology. So anyways, to keep this simple, what's so fascinating about this journey to me is that apparently when our souls drop down into this worldly dimension, we may incarnate many, many times. Now, a lot of people in the Christian religion will say, well, that's not true. The Catholic Church says, well, the Catholic Church threw out the doctrines of reincarnation a long, long time ago, somewhere between the 1st and the 3rd century, when the bearded men were killing each other to decide what Christians might get to believe for the next 1,500 to 2,000 years. So there's such a fascinating journey about karma. And when I get into readings, I love it because you can actually see what the father and the mother may have done in a previous life and how it's interconnected. And, people often say, well, how can you prove it? Well, I can't, but I can tell you one thing that does prove itself in readings is invariably, I find that when the signifactors of the mother and the father are strong, they were good people. They did good things. They were intelligent, or they were professors or doctors or what have you, all by the signifactors. And the people say, well, how did you know? Well, because it's in the chart. It's the symbolism. It's not sun sign astrology. We're literally looking at a matrix of the soul here. And you don't get that from modern love, light, and clueless, what's your sign astrology. I'm not busting on it, though I kind of am. But, why I'm bringing this up is because there's such a rich depth of viewing into the soul by looking at Nadi and Vedic astrology that you just can't get to the modern systems.
I'm wondering about people who talk about remembering being in the womb.
That's right.
Right? It's very, very, very interesting, this whole concept of karma and how, again, we can see it in the astrology. And you were talking about Saturn. So I have a question about that too. Sure. If someone has a debilitated Saturn, or if someone has an exalted Saturn in a specific house, that must play into their karma so strong, since Saturn is the planet of karma in a sense, right?
That is exactly right. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So here is, I'm going to go back to this same diagram. Many people will notice in our podcast, I've referred to this particular diagram a lot. And this is a wonderful system. And again, we're talking a lot about Vedic astrology, Naadi astrology, but I also want to drag in the room here the Share Hagilgam. And please, I've mentioned that in my previous podcast on this, and you can see where that book is. The Share Hagilgam means the gates of reincarnation. It is a wonderful system to wrap our minds around on this complex topic. Like you just brought up something wonderful, Ella. You said, I can remember being in the womb, or some people can. I actually can remember being born too, and I didn't want to come here. I remember that. I was very sad. It was I had a really hard childhood. My childhood was horrible. And, yours wasn't too easy either. And I think most of the people listening can say, hey, yeah, so was mine. Some people have very blessed childhoods, and they do, and it shows in the chart. Other people come here to dissipate karma. Well, you brought it up best in just a moment ago, Ella. Saturn is quite possibly the karmic gunny sack. That's my nickname for it. See, Saturn is the cross over the crescent of the moon. You can see where I'm tracing here on the screen. So even the symbolism, this big thick dashed line is the demarcation between what we would call, or division, the conscious mind and the so-called subconscious mind. Well, now going back to this model, because this actually really helps us to discuss this in a podcast in a more, I think, relatable way. The nefesh is what starts forming in the womb. It's not us. It is the lower conscious mind. Now, this is, to me, some of the most fascinating stuff, because what this means is that you got to remember, when we're born, we can't see, we can't talk, we can't walk, we don't understand languages, we don't know nothing. We're just totally knocked out. If it wasn't for your parents letting you survive for the first early years and months of life, we wouldn't be here. I mean, a child is helpless, just like an animal. You look at an animal being, if mom wasn't taking care of that being, it wouldn't be here. So there's a real sacredness to birth and being born in this world. And the lower conscious mind is just being formed. Proof of this is you take a child and you teach them certain things, they will learn it quite quickly. The human intelligence is very high, and so is animal intelligence. So the bottom line is, this nefesh, again, I always liken it to the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen. Since today everybody uses computer, it's relatable. If you're more into cars, it's like the steering wheel, the brakes, and the gas, and the shifter, right? So it's really our interface, if you will, with these miraculous physical bodies. It's our portal, and you could say control mechanisms to the five senses and all that stuff, right? So, and these miraculous bodies, by the end of the first year, usually somewhere between 8 and 12 months, children are standing up, they're grabbing things, they're moving around, they're smiling, they're talking a little bit, all that. So we're just getting the mechanism of control down. They actually say it's forming right in the womb. It's already somewhat placed in there. It's a very mysterious thing, all this karma and soul stuff. But what's interesting is that we're not our conscious minds. And again, the book that I mentioned that I think is one book that really, I think, elucidates this quite well is the Magus of Strovolos. Why? Because he does it in a way that is exceedingly good. Wouldn't you agree, Ella? Isn't that a great book?
Yeah. Oh, it's a brilliant book. It's wonderful.
It really is. It really is. Because I love him because he's cantankerous too. He really puts it right where it should be. and many people will know him as Daskalos. So here's what I like. And this is the healthy way to look at karma, is our karmas seem to operate far above, you could say, the conscious mind's lower influences. If you were to divide us not only into a conscious mind, subconscious mind, but how about if we said we had a conscious mind, which is always learning and growing and changing? That's the silly putty we all think with. Then you have the spirit. The spirit is much more noble, but it's also all the miraculous things. Is anybody right now thinking about their blood pressure, or how their stomach is digesting the food we just ate earlier, or all the other miraculous things that this body does to protect itself, the immune system? I'm not thinking a thing about that, and I know when I desire to move my hand, it does it right when I want it to. So it's pretty miraculous when you just think about that. And that's another thing we're going to do some podcasts on, is the miraculousness of health and a physical body alone. And we never appreciate that. until it starts failing, until we get sick, until we get hurt, or we get old and it starts breaking down.
Yeah.
So it's really an amazing thing to be grateful for is your health. I've had some of the wealthiest people you can shake a stick at, and they've looked at me and said, Jeff, I'd give everything I have if I could buy my health back. And you can't.
Of course. Anybody would.
It's the most sacred thing we own.
Right. And what I love about the astrology is if you do have something going on with your health, the astrology can really help with that. And it can also kind of be a guide to, well, you might run into trouble at this point in your life. So you kind of want to start taking care of yourself now, to avoid a potential problem. So it's really such a help, the astrology, when it comes to, well, that's called medical astrology, isn't it?
Yeah, and Ayurvedic astrology. Yeah, and we've got a doctor that's going to come on with us that's going to talk about Ayurveda. Yeah. And we're going to talk a lot about some of the things that you can do to really support yourself so that, it's always good to see the doctor. They're great. They got blood tests. They got a lot of wonderful modern science and allopathic medicine. I've always had great respect for it. But we want to stay away from the doctor having to do anything if we can, right? We want to stay healthy.
Yeah, of course.
And I always, I grew up around a lot of medicine with my mother, and I always say, let's stay healthy. But back to the subject of this podcast, I really want to drive some things home here. Karma. Okay. Karma is, again, that strange word. And Saturn seems to operate just above. I've had so many people, including myself, I'm like, why did this happen to me? Or why didn't so-and-so come into my life? Why did this good thing happen or this bad thing happen, et cetera, et cetera. And don't we all feel like sometimes we're caught in a vortex? We kind of feel like, Luke and Obi-Wan and Princess Leia all caught in the tractor being pulled into the Death Star of karma, right? That's what we feel like. And, it's interesting. This is the topics I talked about before. And Saturn operates just above our conscious self-awareness. And now you get into whole topics that are even deeper than just karma itself. And this is the law of attraction. Many people have heard of Abraham Hicks. She's wonderful. I love her. And she's got the law of attraction, the law of allowing, and the law of deliberate creation. And she's right about that. See, and all our positive thinkers and transpersonal trainers and thinkers are right. Napoleon Hill is certainly one of the better kind of fathers of modern day transpersonal stuff. Deepak Chopra, so many others. And they're all right. Krishnamurti, we love Krishnamurti. And also, many
Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle's awesome. Yeah. All of these people, they're wonderful. So, but here's the point. Even though we can think as positive as we want to think, sometimes you're just going to have something coming at you that you have to process and experience. It could be a legal issue. It could be a relationship. It might be a health issue, et cetera, et cetera. Again, if you read the Magus of Strovolos, you'll actually see there's a wonderful story in there about how the Magus of Strovolos, the healer, actually had a little relative die. I think it was his grandson, who was born with his legs attached to his chest. And the doctors, we can't mess with this. So Daskalos, who is the Magus of Strovolos, actually massaged this child and got the legs to be released through molecular interaction. And again, a lot of people don't know this. The Magus of Strovolos actually had a portion of the command of the fourth hierarchy, which is, again, not just the devil. It's the fourth fallen angels and the 8 sub-princes beneath them. This is really deep stuff. Most of your really divine healers have some control of that. They're allowed to have some control of that, not through magic and rituals, but they're literally having upper angels teach them this stuff. Well, long story short, to finish that story, what happened was the karmic release that the Magus of Strovolos had done actually caused him to get gangrene in his leg. And what's interesting, we seem to be bearing the karmas of our ancestors. We may be bearing soul root karmic ancestors, which we may not even know who they are. They may be someone you give birth to. They may be someone you marry. They may be someone you have a lawsuit with or a fight with or a loving relationship with. So these you could say bumper car incidences of souls interacting with one another is quite stunning. And
all of this that you're talking about can be seen in the astrology. That's the point of the karma and astrology. Right. So you can look at someone's birth chart. And like you said earlier, you could see the mom, you could see the dad, you could see the siblings, you could see whoever. And why, though, do we have this karma with these people? And for me, I feel like it's just experience and experience and experience and challenge and challenge and challenge. You know, we have to have these relationships. Obviously, you have to have a relationship with your parents. You have to have a relationship with your siblings.
So I know so many people, or I've seen, wow, your father wasn't around. Look at you. Your father.
No, but what I meant was that is the experience. I don't mean like
you're right.
living
No,
with
you're
them.
right.
I mean, that was the experience. So we have to have whatever that was or is. We had to play that out. That's right. It's so it then leads me to, when comes the end of karma? When does that come?
That's a good point. Oh, wow. Now, see, again, this podcast could be 10 hours long. It could be 14 parts. It could go on forever, because it's so fascinating, that whole journey, because you can see these are called yogas in a birth chart. Yogas are planetary combinations. There's things like Kalasarpa yoga. I have texts that are 300 yogas, and that's even just not even complete. It's a fascinating stuff where there's these planetary combinations. Again, the solar system is a matrix, and not only the solar system, but so is the lunar mansions. The lunar mansions may actually potentially be older than the signs of the zodiacs themselves. They're very, very ancient, and there's a lot of mysteries surrounding all this stuff, plus the fixed stars. And when you factor in fixed stars, which are believed to all be angels and angelic forces in these myriads of galaxies and rotating things that appear to happen in cycles of like 250 million years. Again, I encourage you to read books like the Rig Veda, the Arjur Veda, the Samhitas, the Mahabharata. That's a metaphorical story, very much like some of the stories in the New Testament. So very amazing stuff. And all of this stuff points towards one thing, that we are souls interacting with, and you mentioned it best, Ella. Why do we have to have these experiences? It appears that, at least in this particular dimension, we have free will to do whatever we want. Shakespeare may have been right. The whole world's a stage, and we're the actors upon it. And our karmas may be an amalgam with free will to the script.
All I know is I'm hoping to get my wings next time around. so I'm not sent back here again, because this is really hard.
It's tough. Well, see, that's the Kala Purusha. Kala Purusha is the time. It's the illusion of time. It's the Maya. See, we're all playing a movie. And, this movie's very real. Many of the spiritual peoples will tell you, the whole physical world's an illusion. And I always say, well, hit your hand with a hammer once and call me at the first of the month. It is not an illusion. And we feel physical pain. We feel emotional pain. We have parents that sometimes are not very nice. We have parents sometimes that are exceedingly loving. And I see the pain every day when I do readings, and I'm really blessed to play a part in the best I can do to elucidate this stuff through the cycles of astrology. And, let's bring up a topic that's really important, suicide. Many people have gotten there real close, and many people have tried it. It's actually not a good thing for karma, because they say if you do, you're going to end up in astral dimensions, which is almost a certainty to be reincarnated and go through it again. So again, the religions, some of them have been very good, some of them haven't in elucidating this. And again, I encourage you, the Sharia Gilgam is a text that's very linear in its way of describing souls, but really amazing. And also these Vedantic texts. Again, the Magus of Strobolos is one of the better books I've ever read, that I think puts it forward in such a way that we can relate, that is more, short stories and chapters about events and things that had happened that help wake us up to the fact that we are not just these bodies and we're not just these lives. And, you see the lives that certain people live in astrology. I'm always amazed at how different each perception of reality is. And it really, really is. I mean, you talk to different people. They're all in their own egoic journeys. We all are. I am.
We all have our own journey. We really, really,
but to answer, we do. But to answer your question, here's what's fascinating about the Naadi astrology. You see indicators where people are about ready to obtain something called moksha. Moksha is a strange word that we would call enlightenment, or I call it escaping from Alcatraz, where you literally will incarnate and dissipate so much karmas. And it does really appear to do with tithing, helping, being kind, and not being so attached to your material world.
Right.
Many people say it best. You can be of it or be in it, but not of it. You see, be in it,
but not of it. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a detachment that's more stoic. Gandhi and many other great people, and I know a lot of people don't like Gandhi. They think he was a trafficker. I don't know if I believe that, but whatever. Same thing with Mother Teresa. I get all kinds of hate mail. She was a trafficker. I don't believe that. I'm not here to defend her. Child trafficking is a horrible thing, and it's going on everywhere. People have, trafficked and sold children and maimed children just to make money is insane.
It goes on everywhere. It goes on everywhere. In every country.
And the bottom line is Gandhi made a statement that I really liked. He said, God created time so that everything wouldn't happen at once. And I like that statement. I think it's a great statement because it's true. And that's where karma is. We have to view these lives sometimes as maybe what we had to go through to purify and rectify that karma. And, that diagram I had up before, they actually say that the karmic energies release, and this is where astrology is really, really interesting, particularly Nadi and Vedic astrology. You can see when these karmas are releasing. You can see when there's challenges to the mother, to the father, to other family members, but particularly yourself. And we see when we're going up the hill and peaking out, we can see when we're heading down the hill. You can see the curves in the you could say, corners and challenging spots in life. They come and they will come to all of us. And I think the religions had such a problem with astrology is because they thought people would rely on astrology only. Now, I kind of agree with that because, see, I actually do. A lot of people, I think, follow their astrology too slavishly, where I like to do readings where, hey, you're not your astrology, you're not your sun sign. And astrology is never going to replace being a good person and getting good karma. I think the ancient astrologers had it right. And that is, you view your astrology much more like we view our speedometer and the surroundings and the indicators in our dashboard. They're just that. They're indicators. But remember, we got to take responsibility. We're the driver. See, when you do things that are horrible, you're going to create more karma. Killing people, killing animals, being rude to people, being emotionally mean to people, taking advantage of people, lying. All this stuff has its consequences in one shape, form, or another. They're creating elementals. When you do something out of integrity and honesty, and then you get mistreated for it, that's a different story. You see, So it's really important, this whole thing of karma. You see where the doctrines that have come up in the religions are not 100% wrong. So, I actually have a wonderful letter from all the rabbis in Europe to Maimonides. Maimonides, if anyone knows, was a very prominent figure in the Jewish religion. And he read this, and all these rabbis were saying, God, I'm helping people. I'm doing this. I'm giving them insights. What's your opinion? We came back with all kinds of scathing attacks. And this has always been the response in some of the more staunch, you could say, Orthodox religions, just like in the Catholic religion and also in the various sectors of Christianity. It's the work of the devil. Oh my God, that's evil. Well, I think, and this is my opinion. I'm not here stating anything one way or another. But my opinion is that happened simply because they couldn't deal with it rationally, because people would find the accuracy in medical astrology. There's one astrologer, we're going to talk about this down the line too, who was brought to court in, I think it was the 1600s. His name was Blagrave. He had healed so many people that doctors couldn't. And he would do analysis using interrogation astrology. A lot of people know it as horror. And he would administer herbs. And they were literally going to prosecute him and hang him. And he's in the courtroom and the judge is ready to decree sentence. And all these people came in and they said, wait, he saved my son. He cured me. He helped me, or he gave me direction and was accurate. And we didn't have to get our arm amputated or whatever it was. And the judge heard all this and said, you know what? He said, I can't convict you. Get out of here. So there's always been this war between astrology and spirituality and religions. I say, if you look at the ancient Naadi astrology, you'll see a really interesting cohesion here that fits very, very well with God, angels, spirits, and human life in a way that I thought was a lot better than anything I've seen in the West. Because I've always lived this, I won't have anything to do with astrology. That's the work of the devil. Get out of here. I'm like, okay. And I always heard that. And I went, wow, why is that? And the more I looked into it, I found that many people really have gotten exposed. And see, I agree with the religions in this sense. There was a lot of magic that was going on, particularly in medieval Europe, and also particularly in the Middle East, where they were making talismans to hurt people, to win wars. See, they started figuring out that astrology has so much energy that it could be used for nefarious purposes. Well, the churches looked at this and they said, whoa, wait a minute. We can't have this stuff. And many documents that I fully agree with the religions on should be burned. And I have some of them for research purposes. And I've studied them with a lot of different people, Manly P. Hall and many others that I've met through the years. And many rabbis have shown me this stuff. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, this is pretty heavy duty stuff. You don't do stuff like that for nefarious purposes. It's just like building bombs. We don't build bombs to hurt people, though the military can get away with it because it's used in defense of armies and so on and so forth. So it's all how you use things.
That's right. That's right. And the bottom line, that's right. What your intention is. And the bottom line is it's all karma. A lot of people do things and say it's for good, like building these bombs or whatever, war's never good. And
it's
that's
not.
All,
and that's a tough thing. But on the other hand, when you watch, your loved ones get slaughtered, again, these are, and if you don't protect yourself, it's peace through strength. Peace through strength. I agree too. If you don't protect yourself, people come in and take what you got. This is again, the oldest battle on the planet is good and evil. It's just like, right now we have this huge war against guns and gun control and the Second Amendment. Well, I hear all the stories all the time where, we have hideous, horrible shootings, which couldn't be worse, where they're killing people in the streets and, drive-by shootings and gang members and all the drug lords and abuse of guns. On the other hand, I hear great stories where, a policeman saves someone's life by saying, hey, don't do that or we'll shoot you. Or somebody will come in to rob a place and an off-duty policeman or a concealed carry permit person stops a very horrible event from happening. So this is planet Earth. This is planet Earth. You can't, it's very hard to sit on one side of the fence or the other. It's really good is good and evil is evil, and karma is karma. And I think divine karma always shows up in charts. And what I find is that when you do readings, why would this person get these kinds of yogas in their chart? And there are some yogas I see that are really, it's like, whoa, you can see the deformity. You can see where certain things had happened. And there's a magic to astrology that is amazing, because if you see a child born and the moon or the sun or another planet is going to a malefic conjunction, you're probably going to see something very bad happen there. Very bad. And like I just had a client just recently who I said, oh my God, the father died right when she was a very young girl. And it was very traumatic, head-on car collision, blah, blah, blah. And I see this all the time, or I'll see where some traumatic incident would happen to an individual, like the parent would leave, or they'll get adopted, or some other thing. And you wonder, geez, if there's a God, why would this happen?
Why is this all happening? Right.
Why is this all happening? So we got to maybe take a different viewpoint and realize that if you use astrology as the scientific ancient sacred science it was, and you just examine it particularly for events in life. I mean, even the staunchest skeptic would go, wow, you're right, that happened, at this point in time, either the good or the ill. I see the good happening too, where miraculous things. I had a dear friend of mine who just passed away, and I told him here about 15, 20 years ago, I said, wow, I said, you got some progressions coming in that are going to be amazing. He said, well, I don't know what that would be. He says, I'm broke, I'm lucky I'm living here at a place. He was paying a low rent because he was a caretaker. And all of a sudden, I think it was right about when that progression happened, he gets a phone call from a relative that says, well, you're the only one left. We're going to give you the farm. And he goes from this destitute person to this huge estate and farm, which grew ginseng and all this amazing organic stuff. And he inherited it. So, I mean, these things happen. I see them repeatedly. I see the good. I see the ill. I see the challenging, the physical, the lawsuits, whatever. They all come at us all.
Yeah,
and this
we all go through it. Mm-hmm.
So it's not the work of the devil. It may be the work of us. So karma, what is karma, to round this out? Because we could keep this going forever. And I love this conversation, Ella. But karma might be the unfoldment of energies. And good karmas happen too. I see people, it's really the merits of the soul. In fact, a lot of people say to me, geez, Jeff, am I a Capricorn? Am I this? I said, no, you're not. I believe astrology happens because of the merits and demerits of your soul. Now, that's a whole bunch different than, oh, I'm a Capricorn, or I'm a Pisces, or I'm an Aries. No, you're not. In fact, I believe the angels, and this is what the ancient texts really elucidate, tie us into these meat suits called bodies, commensurate with the merits and challenges, or demerits, if you will, of the soul at that point in time. That's the reason they say the parents have, at the time that you could say conception happens, is that soul is assigned to that karmic journey. And it may be intertwined or may not be intertwined with the people having you. Now, clearly, there's a genetic intertwinement with your parents. I mean, how could there not be, right? We've got overwhelming scientific data to say that. But these are the mysteries. These are the true mysteries of karmas. And, we hear many great stories in Christianity and in many other cultures about these wonderful healings that were done and dischargements of spirits and elementals, like he cast out legion, So miraculous stories in the New Testament, miraculous stories in the Old Testament, miraculous stories in many different texts. And these are true, in my opinion. And these things happen because that high soul was allowed to have the control over the evil spirits. See, this is really what's been left out of religions. The evil spirits seem to be incarcerated here at the very deepest molecular levels and quite beyond. And there's something very special about this planet. This is why we've had podcasts we talk about, will the world get blown up, in mushroom clouds? My personal opinion is no. And I think we hear these stories about extraterrestrials and lights over nuclear installations. Yeah, a lot of war happens. Yes, a lot of souls get killed, and it's horrible when it does. But there seems to be something divinely protecting the earth from utter destruction. It goes through a lot. And I believe the flood of Noah happened, and I think cataclysms have happened throughout the history of this planet. And I think the moon was moved here. There's a lot of mysteries to the moon and the axis of the earth. I know the flat earthers don't believe about an axis. And I've had people say, well, Jeff, he doesn't know about the 23-44 minute. We're not talking about scientific details here. We're talking conceptually. The angularity of this earth, or whatever it is been skewed, and the cycles of the moon, the occultations of the moon, have a lot to do with souls and karma. And there's theories in some ancient texts that waves of souls come through this incarnational process we call life, where we're born, we know nothing, we develop a personality, then lower nefesh, and that absorbs into different elements of the soul. It's called the neshma, which is the reincarnational Saturn, where it's almost like an Akashic record, of the, you could say, records of the souls and experiences. And all those experiential things, at some point in time, and there is no time, get moved off into the upper wisdom of the soul called the Haya. And that was a diagram I had before. And if anyone reads the Sharia Gilgam, that's a nice way of putting our feeble minds into understanding this exceedingly complex and divine stuff. And then at some point in the reincarnational process, the wayward sons and daughters head home to the upper divinity of the soul. And then there are some people that believe, and I'm kind of one of them, that we may end up into some very high angelic form that is much higher than any of these lower incarnations are. And there appears to be an evolution of these incarnations. And the yogas in the Nadi and the Vedic astrology indicate when that stuff's likely to happen. It's called moksha. Usually you can see when a soul has gone through enough of its previous, you could say, punching bag incarnations, that it starts to earn merits and move on.
Right.
And we
looked at that. Remember, we looked at my mom when she passed, because I was really curious about that, because she had such a hard life and she really deserved to move on to a much, much higher place because she was such a good person. And we looked at that in her chart and we did see that she would be moving up higher.
Oh, you could see it in your mom's eyes. She was just a great soul. So again, these physical bodies are really just the vessels we comport spirit out through. We truly are spiritual beings having a physical experience.
We are. Absolutely.
And we see this culturally, where people become so ingrained with their way of thinking and culturalism and all that. And, the world's evolving. And part of what we're seeing right now is this whole high-tech movement into AI. And remember, I said the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, a lot of astrologers don't agree with this, but I really have to say, when George Washington, started the Revolutionary Army, we saw the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The astrology showed it. Just in 2020, we've seen a clash between freedom and fascism, but moreover, we're seeing a high-tech revolution into artificial intelligence and technologies and ways of thinking we've never seen, ever. And this is what's interesting, is waves of souls keep passing through this earth. And I think the axis will not tip because of magnetics, but my opinion is the magnetics will tip because when certain amounts of souls have passed through here for enough purification and rectification, that's when we're going to see a change in not only longevity, but also the angularity and the phases of the moon. That's what I think is going to dictate it. And that's why nobody can 100% call it.
Well, that's something to look forward to. That is definitely something to look forward to.
So
in the energy.
This is a vast topic, and, people are going to listen to this who know about this stuff and say, well, he didn't mention this and didn't mention that. Well, you can't. In a podcast, literally, we could make this a 50-part series and never scratch the surface.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know everything about karma. No one I've ever met, and I've met some really wonderful people. I know that the more we become humble to the divine, And this is why there's great truths in the Christian scriptures, great truths in the Hebrew scriptures and the Vedantic, and all the great religions were founded upon really amazing principles. And again, read the Megas Astrovolos. One thing we all have to bow down to is no matter how sophisticated this planet and this culture and this race gets, we will never figure out and be able to replicate the divinity of life. It's kind of like the Mr. Wizard cartoon. When we get to the end of the tunnel, which again isn't time, but it's the collective experiential reincarnations, and the lower conscious minds dissolve back up into the wisdom of the soul, which is known as the Haya. There's Neshma, which is the karma, and then there's this absorption of these incarnations, and that's in that diagram, and also in the Sharia Gilgam, and many other texts that are kind of more metaphoric in the Vedantic stuff, that we actually will know and we will remember. And that God only knows literally when that happens.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this was very, very nice and interesting. And thank you so much, Jeff.
Oh,
Thanks
God,
for
yeah. Well,
everything. And please, everyone, pose your comments and your questions. And thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you here each time. And take good care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.
You bet. All right. Thank you for listening.